Street Fighter 10. I think the math adds up, pretty much. I got nothing.
This is Street Fighter 02, released in 1997 for Sega Saturn and also for Sony PlayStation. And yes, this is the Japanese version of the game that some people would know as Street Fighter Alpha 2, which is being played on an American Sega Saturn with an action replay thing. All of these things imposed with 500% tariffs courtesy of the specular collecting community or something, I guess, whatever. I also got a bunch of Virtua Fighter games and Fighting Vipers and Mega Mixes because they were cheaper in Japanese. Not that it really matters, but anyway. Street Fighter 02 saw release a year or so after the original Street Fighter 0 game. I'm not quite sure whether you want to call it a sequel, a soft reboot, or just a plain old update to that initial release. You've got an expanded roster of 18 fighters to choose from. Aside from the original 10 playable characters of the first game, you also had the 3 originally secret fighters, Vega, Goki, and Dan, openly available. Added to the mix are Street Fighter 2 mainstays Dalsum and Zangief, Gen from the original Street Fighter game, Rolento from Final Fight, and finally future fan favorite Sakura, who you can either consider a wholly original new character Do Not Steal, or just another derivative of the Ken, Ryu, Goki, Dan, Sean, Shoto style. Although to be fair, Sakura is almost different enough to be somewhat unique, so that's something, I guess. Anyway, you know the deal with these Street Fighter things by now. You have an array of basic attacks, special moves, and a couple of super combos that can be executed whenever you have level stocks in your power meter. The more buttons you press in your command, 1 punch, 2 punch, whatever, the more stocks are used, and the more stocks used, the more effective the super. Some innovations from 01, air blocking and zero counters, made the cut in 02, although that chain combo thing is no longer a thing in this game. Instead, 02 introduced something called variable or custom combos, a gimmick where you input a simple command of sorts and you'll enable a temporary burst of speed that will allow you to string together a series of moves. The more super at your disposal, the longer the time you have in this state. Proficient use of this custom combo ability can make this a useful weapon. 02 boasts a couple modes of play. The traditional arcade mode where you fight 8 computer opponents with your final boss depending on the character chosen. Also during this time, if you satisfy certain conditions, you'll encounter a mid-boss fight or even challenge Shin Goki, which is just Goki but shinier. You also have the usual 2-player versus mode as well as a training mode to practice your moves. And there's also the survival mode, go through the entire roster on one try and limited health refills. Nothing special but a fun diversion regardless. The Saturn version also includes alternate versions of characters lacking in the PlayStation port, most notably classic versions of Dalsum and Zangief, as well as Evil Ryu, a version of Ryu with Goki's teleport and Raging Demon Super Sling, a thing that continues to exist for some reason. And of course, you've got classic Chun-Li and Shin Goki as a playable character if you know the code. Street Fighter 02 on Saturn is a perfectly adequate conversion of the arcade original. It's not a perfect port because of unavoidable technical issues such as loading times and music that fade in and out like you're playing a music track off of CD, but once you get to the meat and potatoes, the gameplay, it ain't half bad. Control feels pretty solid for the most part, special moves execute fairly consistently, and you can map the L and R bumpers on the controller for things like taunting or other bits, which is nice. Custom combos are a thing that exists for those who can make the most of it, but otherwise the tried and true supers work just as well, even if you still need to press multiple punches or kicks for higher levels of super, something that would eventually be dropped in Alpha 3 for better or worse. Varied selection of characters and the alternate versions are fun little experiments to sample if nothing else. Visually, 02 looks pretty damn good. Again, it's not quite arcade perfect, there's a reduction of frames in certain animations so it's not quite as silky smooth, but it's smooth enough. Character sprites look like they retain the same size as the arcade, or at least close to it. The backgrounds still look pretty damn good. Probably some of my favorite stages to be found in these 0/Alpha games if I'm being honest here. And the opening sequence looks fine. Not sure if it's done in-game or if it's just a clean video file like the PlayStation version, but this looks better than that version did. That version had a very grainy opening that was just poor quality video. This looks better than that at least. So these CD versions of Street Fighter Zero 2, Saturn, PlayStation, the eventual PC, Windows port, has a remixed soundtrack, much like they did in Alpha 1. And I have mixed feelings on the tracks. Some of these sound pretty good in a remix, but others sounded better in their original arcade tracks. Your mileage may vary, of course, but of the home ports, they only have the remix tracks, so if you don't care for these remix tracks and you prefer the original arcade tracks, tough rocks, pal. Sound effects and voice bites made the transition just fine, sounding just as crisp and clear as ever. No complaints there. Overall, Street Fighter Zero 2 got a great port on Sega Saturn. Gameplay holds up fairly well. You've got slightly more content than the PlayStation version in the form of alternate extra characters and modes, visually splendid looking, and the audio, again, your mileage will vary there. Nowadays, there are better ways of playing Zero 2/Alpha 2 that offer a more arcade-perfect experience, and also lacks the constant load times of the CD versions of the 96, but the Saturn port holds its own more than admirably. A great port of a great game. Can't ask for much more than that.